EPA, an agency he once sued. CNN senior Washington correspondent Joe Johns has more for you.
Scott Pruitt, Donald Trump's pick for Environmental Protection Agency administrator, is a staunch climate change denier, giving Democrats and environmental groups whiplash after Trump's highly publicized meetings with prominent climate change activists.
Attorney General Pruitt has a strong conservative record as a state prosecutor and has demonstrated a familiarity with laws and regulations impacting a large energy resource state.
An ally of the fossil fuel industry, the Oklahoma Attorney General is a fierce critic of the agency he may soon lead, filing lawsuits against the EPA over its regulations of power plants, including Obama's effort to significantly reduce their emissions.
When you look at the EPA and the role that it's played over the last several years, there's going to be substantial change in that agency. There's going to be a regulatory rollback.
Critics blasting Trump's nominee, the League of Conservation Voters, writing, Scott Pruitt running the EPA is like the fox guarding the henhouse. He has fought to pad the profits of big polluters at the expense of public health. As for climate change, Pruitt wrote in the National Review just a few months ago that the link between global warming and human activity is far from settled. Incoming Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer saying Pruitt's reluctance to accept the facts or science on climate change couldn't make him any more out of touch with the American people and with reality. The decision to name Scott Pruitt came just a short time after the president-elect gave environmentalists what you could call a glimmer of hope for middle ground by meeting with Al Gore, who's been a leading voice on the issue of climate change. Carol?
All right, Joe Johns reporting live for us from Washington, so let's bring back my guest, shall we? Reed Wilson is with me again, the national correspondent for The Hill, and Rebecca Burgess, a CNN political analyst and national political reporter for Real Clear Politics. So, Mr. Trump's pick to lead the EPA sued the EPA over Mr. Obama's emission reduction program. But Trump also talked with Al Gore and Leonardo DiCaprio about climate change. So what gives, Reed?
Well, this is one of the things that I'm going to be watching. We're going to see a sea change here in the relationship between the federal government and the states now that we've got a new administration. Scott Pruitt, attorneys general from states like Texas and Kansas, very conservative states, spent the last 8 years suing the Obama administration, every agency from the EPA to the Department of Energy, the Department of the Interior, Fish and Wildlife Service. Now we're going to see a reversal. If Scott Pruitt, as the next EPA administrator, tries to undo a lot of the climate regulations, tiny step, I think you're going to see some Democratic states, most notably California, stepping in with litigation as fast as possible. The Trump administration is going to try to undo a lot of the regulations the Obama administration has implemented, but even undoing those regulations takes time. It requires public comment. It requires meetings. Every single one of those steps takes time, and if any of them are skipped, you can imagine that Democratic states are going to step in and try to stop the undoing of some of these regulations, or at least tie them up in court for years.
Okay, so that could be messy. And also, Rebecca, during the campaign, Trump did say he wanted to dismantle the EPA. With this pick, isn't it possible?
Well, he did say that, Carol, and then later sort of walked back that position and said, well, instead of dismantling the EPA entirely, we can at least roll back some of these unnecessary regulations to help businesses who are really just trying to do the best business they can in these states. So he did walk back from that position, but certainly that's the fear of many Democrats, Carol, is that they will roll back these regulations to a point where the EPA is not really focused on its core mission of actually protecting the environment and not able to fully execute that mission. And so this is certainly the fear that Democrats have at this stage. But what Donald Trump has argued is that there are just too many regulations, that the EPA has overreached. And so I think that's exactly what he's getting at with picking Scott Pruitt for this role, that he wants to address those regulations first.
There is a fine line to walk here because, you know, need I remind people of the Elk River in West Virginia, right? The water was poisoned in the Elk River, and the drinking water was poisoned for the folks, and that was from a byproduct of the coal industry. And in Oklahoma, they just had 2 earthquakes a couple of days ago, and scientists believe those earthquakes are being called from the injection of wastewater from the shale oil industry. So in that sense, you really do need some regulatory agency, Reed, to to protect people from industry.
And this choice is much different from even the EPA administrators that George W. Bush picked. Remember, his first EPA administrator was Christine Todd Whitman, the former governor of New Jersey, who was a relative centrist when it comes to Republican policies. One of the things that I think is most fascinating, though, is that Scott Pruitt comes from a state where the energy industry relies on fracking, like you just mentioned, and that process costs a lot of money. As the global oil commodity prices have fallen, one of the things we've seen is that the companies in those specific states have been shedding jobs. The states where unemployment rate is rising include states like Oklahoma and North Dakota and Wyoming, places that are really heavy on energy dependence. So, even as we talk about Donald Trump and the carrier deal and jobs moving overseas because of forces far out of the control of any American president, so too is the oil industry undergoing some changes that not even an American president, not even an EPA administrator is going to be able to change or reverse by rolling back some regulations.
And the irony of energy independence for the United States, Rebecca, I think that America is something like 74% energy independent. It gets it doesn't get very much oil from overseas anymore, especially from Middle Eastern countries. The oil industry is kind of tied to the market in the price of oil. So can you really control that as president of the United States? And doesn't that have a say in how many jobs companies keep and how many jobs it jettisons?
Certainly, and I agree with Reed's assessment that, obviously there are things that an American president cannot directly control or address. Really, a president is limited in his power to address these issues. But Donald Trump has certainly made clear during this transition process, Carol, that he is going to be very friendly to oil companies and open to working with them directly. I mean, one of his picks potentially for Secretary of State could be the CEO of ExxonMobil. So it's pretty clear that Donald Trump has a good relationship with these energy companies and feels, as he expressed during the campaign, that the climate could be better for energy companies in the United States. Certainly this is a popular Republican position, but I think we'll be seeing a lot of pushback from Democrats on that.
All right, Rebecca Berg, Reed Wilson, thanks for your insight as always. Still to come in the newsroom, Donald Trump once again turns to the military for help in running the nation. We'll talk about his pick to run Homeland Security with a woman who knows a lot about that job, Janet Napolitano, next.